Assalamu alaikum, inshallah you're well guys. So I remember one of the first things I had to do when I started my professional career was to take minutes of a meeting which was attended by Philip Hammond. Now you guys may not recall, but he was the Secretary of State for Transport back in 2011, and I remember at that point no one had ever taught me how to take notes. So inshallah in today's video I'm going to share some practical tips to help you guys out. Firstly, when it comes to meetings, there's two common terms to understand. The first is an agenda or an agenda item. An agenda is a summary of what's to be discussed at the meeting. It's normally sent out in advance of the meeting, and an agenda item is one of the topics. So an agenda will summarize everything that's going to be discussed, and an agenda item will be one of the topics to be discussed at that meeting. Agendas are really useful because they help direct the meeting and ensure all the relevant points are discussed by the end of the meeting. Trust me guys, I've been in so many meetings where there's no agenda items, and then you get to the end of the meeting and you realize you haven't even started discussing what you were supposed to discuss in the first place. Then you have minutes or notes which summarizes what was discussed and the key action points. So an agenda summarizes what's to be discussed at the meeting, and then following the meeting you have a set of minutes or notes. And it normally comes down to the person who's most junior in the meeting or is quite early in their career to take minutes. So if you're a first year grad or apprentice, I expect that responsibility to come upon you. And just quickly guys, this doesn't mean that every meeting has a set of minutes. For example, you may have an informal catch up with your manager to discuss your progress. Doesn't mean that there are going to be a formal set of minutes after that meeting. It's normally more reserved for things such as client meetings or where you're discussing a big project, because minutes can then help document what was discussed, and then you can agree key action points to follow up on later as well. So guys, you can take minutes on either a laptop or a notebook. Some people do get a bit funny with laptops because it can be quite distracting. You can be in a meeting and it can be quite distracting if someone's clicking away, typing things up on their laptop at the same time. So a lot of people I work with will have notebooks as well, just to make sure that they don't distract people whilst they're in a meeting. But the answer is clear guys. If you do have a choice, definitely choose a laptop over a notebook because there's so many benefits it brings. Firstly, you can preset a template on your laptop so your minutes are much easier to order later on. Whenever I've been taking minutes in a meeting, I've always found that although agenda items are in order, someone may raise a comment 10 minutes later after an agenda item has been discussed. And if you're writing things on your notebook, it can be quite difficult, right? You've got to go back to that relevant page, make sure you've noted it down against that agenda item, whereas in your laptop it's much easier to do so. And the chances are you're going to have to type up these meeting minutes anyway. So if you started on your laptop, it makes that task much easier. So to be clear guys, if you have a choice, definitely choose a laptop to type up minutes over a notebook. Secondly, make sure you do a lot of the admin in advance of the meeting. Set your templates up. And if you work for a professional services firm, it's very likely that they will have a set template, a set way that they like to document their minutes. So it could be the firm's logo at the top. It could then be the title of the meeting, the attendees, the agenda items, and then the key action points. And you can set a lot of this up in advance of the meeting. So review the agenda, pick out the agenda items, put that in your minutes template. Look at the calendar invite in Outlook. See who's accepted the invite. Pre-populate their names on the template. You can do a lot of this in advance of the meeting, and trust me, it saves time. You can also sort out a lot of the formatting in advance of the document. So what I tend to do is put different agenda items on different pages on Word. And that's not how my final set of minutes would ever look, but it makes it easier. Like I mentioned before, people often remember things after an item's been fully discussed. So instead of faffing around, moving up and down through a page, you can just scroll to that relevant page, press enter, add that point in, and then clean up your minutes afterwards. The key bit of the minutes are going to be next steps and any action points. So when you're in the meeting, I'd always clarify what these are. Even if you're sure what the action points are, please do clarify this. It's a tip I recommend because it just makes sure that you haven't missed any key action points off. You don't want to be in a situation where a few weeks later you're being asked by a partner, a senior leader, a CFO, oh, what about this item that we discussed in this meeting? Give me an update on that. And you realize because you didn't note it down, no one's followed up on it. That won't look good. When it comes to writing the minutes, guys, remember, it's a summary of what was discussed, not verbatim. You're not trying to quote everyone. Use the test that whether a person with limited understanding of that particular topic will be able to pick up the minutes and get an idea, a relatively decent idea of what was discussed. They don't have to know what each person said at each second of the meeting. That's not the point of minutes. So considering that test I just mentioned, it's important you include any background as well. I'm not talking essays, but 1 or 2 lines about a project to give some background, to give some context to someone would be great. Because what often happens in a number of organizations is people move. You might get a new manager coming, you might get someone new on the project in. That's happening to me right now. And if I pick up a set of meeting minutes and someone's given some context just to help me out because I have limited understanding of the project, I'm definitely going to think good things about them. And guys, as you need to summarize what was discussed, it's important you know the agenda beforehand, because that will list all the items which are the key points to be covered in that meeting. And guys, if you're completely unsure, ask the question, right? Speak to the meeting organizer. Say, hey, it's my first time working on this project. I understand I'm going to be taking meeting minutes. Can I just ask 5 minutes of your time just to cover off what are the key points that you want addressed? What are the key points that you want me to cover off in these set of minutes? That's it. So guys, always summarize what was said and use shorthand as well. If I'm in a meeting and I make a comment, I don't expect the minutes to say Fazan Mehdi said XYZ, right? It's absolutely fine to have FM dash and then my comment, right? As an example. So if text language as an example works for you, use it. Why? Because you're going to write up these minutes formally at the end of the meeting anyway, right? If it means that you will spend less time writing things down, more time on listening, then definitely use text language. Do what works for you. Remember, everyone is going to be interested in the final set of minutes you write up, not the initial draft that you're typing away in the meeting. I'd always use third person, guys, when you're writing minutes and leave the emotion out of it. Don't try and give your own personal opinion. It's very easy when you favor a particular outcome to write more on that outcome or to write less on that outcome so it doesn't get picked up. But try and be as objective as possible when you're drafting your minutes, when you're noting everything down, and leave the emotion out of it. People also have mixed opinions about quotes. So when a key decision is made, absolutely fine to quote the senior leader, explain why that was, give some rationale. In that instance, I would say quoting is absolutely fine. But I'd be a bit mindful, right? I wouldn't want to see myself being quoted if it's not really relevant to the meeting minutes. Say I'm just making a passing comment on an agenda item and I see it quoted later on in the official minutes. I may not be happy with that. That may not sit right with me. Yes, I may have made that point, but in a meeting, there's context. You would see from my facial expressions, you will see from my hand gestures, that point may be conceived completely differently to how it is when it is written down in an official set of minutes, in an official document, which is accessible by the whole team. So something just to be mindful of, guys, when you're quoting people. The final point I want to make, guys, is more of a lessons piece, right? Learn from my mistakes, guys. Firstly, you have to focus on multitasking. You won't just be writing up minutes, you'll also be listening to what is being discussed at the time. And it's happened to me so many times where I've been too focused on writing things up or making my set of minutes perfect in the meeting where I've missed a key action point. I've missed something else in the meeting. And that's been picked up. So something just to be aware of. Don't focus too much on listening and neglect your minutes, and don't do it vice versa as well. And guys, these things happening is quite normal. So if it does happen, you feel like you've just missed a key point, you can follow up with someone after the meeting. I'd recommend doing it as soon as possible because that's when your memory is fresh from that meeting, right? I've had it again happen so many times where I've followed up on something a few days later or maybe even weeks later. And then actually I can't remember the context. What was that point I was supposed to follow up on? I don't know. My memory is not as fresh as possible. So just 2 things to watch out for, guys. Obviously, focus on multitasking at the time. And if you have any questions, queries, or things to clarify, follow up on those things as soon as possible. Normally what I try to do, guys, if I were you, is get those meeting minutes drafted as soon as possible, get them reviewed by the meeting organizer, if possible, before sending them out. And then people can comment on those actions as well. Maybe you did miss something off, but because everyone's memory is quite fresh, they can pick up on those things straight away. Inshallah, you found those tips useful. I'll leave it there, guys. As always, any questions or queries, please feel free to comment below or message me on Instagram.